You are listening to the global network of podcasters dedicated to the pharmacy profession. Welcome to the Pharmacy Podcast Network. Welcome to Executive Dose, the podcast where pharmaceutical leadership meets unfiltered insight. Hosted by Stephen Beckman, CEO of YARAL Pharma. Each episode explores the complex forces shaping today's pharmaceutical industry, from global supply chain stress and regulatory shakeups to innovation in branded and generic drug markets. Join us as we engage C-level leaders and decision-makers in candid conversations about navigating disruption, driving growth, and preparing for the next era of pharmaceutical transformation. Curiosity leads, strategy follows. This is the Executive Dose.
Hey, this is the Executive Dose podcast, part of the Pharmacy Podcast Network. I'm the founder of the PPN. My name is Todd Ure. We started this in 2009, the first podcast about our pharmacy profession. As we have evolved, we realize that there's always these gaps in the content that we're delivering to over 80,000 listeners per month. And one of those gaps is digging deeper into the pharmaceutical sector and the support that that part of the industry gives all of healthcare and how that's connected directly to our pharmacist, my favorite provider. We have someone who is special to me, a friend of mine, lives in Brownsville, Pennsylvania, the studio headquarters of the Pharmacy Podcast Network. I met him in San Diego at the NACDS Total Store Expo, and I want to say welcome to your own show, Mr. Stephen Beckman.
Well, thanks, Todd. And it's a pleasure to be here. I couldn't agree with you more. This whole concept is about exchange of information and a greater and deeper understanding of how all the players have an impact in delivering healthcare to our patients. And I think a lot of times people interpret the same things that we're seeing differently or assume certain things of how we operate as manufacturers. And we thought this what a great podcast is to be able to start showing how all the things that are impacting us do actually impact all of us in different ways and how we can ultimately work together. And with a greater understanding, I think it's going to open the doors to find better ways to work with each other, support each other, and ultimately improve the outcome of patients, which is why whether you're a pharmacist or a CEO of a manufacturing company and everybody in between, I think we get into this industry because we have a passion to helping patients and people in need, and that's what we really want to do. So obviously we're looking to be focused on timely topics and issues and translate that into a discussion that will allow us to see how that's really impacting us in a very open and honest way. So I think if I'm not mistaken, Todd, you actually caught a headline this morning that you wanted to put up on the screen.
Yeah, I'm telling you what, just for the listeners, this article that just came out, Big Pharma likely to endure Trump's tariff pricing pressures, but threats to generics persist. And Stephen, this is why I'm glad you're here, because we're going to be able to tap into your understanding of the pharmaceutical markets as our expert. Every single one of our hosts always drill down into their specific theme, and that's why the Executive Dose, that's why we're excited to have you here. So kicking right off, you have a guest that actually can help kind of blow this up even more so. So definitely introduce him to us.
Yeah, so I'd like to introduce Nick Hart, the CEO of IBSA USA, as one of the companies within the IBSA CH family where YARAL also sits. So it's great to have you, Nick. I appreciate you joining us. And so let's tackle that first question. I'll open up with a comment and then let Nick as well comment. So look, I think the big thing about tariffs is it's still very unknown water. It's very murky, and we're trying to struggle our way through whether it's a brand organization or whether it's a generic organization. But ultimately, we are going to have to absorb this change that's in front of us, and that how we absorb that is going to impact throughout the supply chain or value chain within healthcare. Likely, I would think Nick would agree that a lot of it's going to be on the shoulders of the manufacturers first and foremost until it evolves over time. And I do agree with the headline. I do think that branded organizations are going to be hit and will endure it. I think the generic side of the business is probably going to have a greater threat, as the headline says. I think it's going to have some downstream effects that could obviously, first and foremost, impact financials. But I think more importantly, it could change those financials dynamic, and the cost of doing business because of some of this additional pressure could lead to things that will actually see a rationalization of some of the generic companies. There's over 400 plus generic pharmaceutical companies servicing the U.S. market right now. And in many cases, certain products that we probably have more than we actually need to ensure fair pricing in the marketplace. I think the other thing that's going to happen is that it could create an even greater pressure on drug shortage. And how that impacts us then means it makes it more difficult for companies to continue to produce some products that might not have a significant margin. And as a result, and we've seen this historically over the last couple of years, companies stop producing certain products, creating that shortage. And then that obviously trickles down to the ability of pharmacists getting a hold of the product and the patient ultimately having it. So I think there's a lot to unravel with the tariffs, and I think we're going to see it evolve and change. Positions today might be different, but we are going to have to find a way to endure it, as the headline said, and find a way to work through the system so that ultimately everybody's still healthy at the end of it, meaning pharmaceutical companies can still produce products, wholesalers, distributors, and pharmacists can get the product, and ultimately the patients will have it available to them in a ready format with high quality products. But Nick, what do you think about this topic?
Well, I mean, yeah, we're seeing so much speculation these days as to, what's going to happen with tariffs, how they're going to affect our organization or this organization, or what's going to happen along the supply chain if, in fact, tariffs hit. We don't know, but the headline is a good one. Big pharma is likely to endure this. There's a lot more latitude in pricing of branded pharmaceutical prices. They have the more wherewithal than do a lot of generic companies that are working on razor thin margins on various products across the spectrum. So yeah, I agree. I think if tariffs are put into place, big pharmaceutical companies will figure out a way to work within the system to make prices still reasonable for the patients who ultimately need the product, but that's going to be more and more challenging for the generics. The generics will take the brunt of the hit and will suffer more. And also, if you look at it kind of statistically, you see that many of the products that are sold in the United States on the branded side are either coming from the United States manufacturers or from international companies that can, in fact, at some point manufacture in the United States. That is not true with the generic manufacturers. They tend to be ex-US and will be hit harder, ostensibly will be hit harder with the advent of these tariffs, if they come out the way that most people are speculating right now. So I guess the expression is, Stephen, I'm in violent agreement with you.
Well, I agree with you as well, Nick. I think one of the interesting things is, with anything that happens, I'm always of the belief that there can be good and bad, or challenges and opportunity. And I think there is a spirit behind this to ensure that the U.S. market in particular has, affordable medicine. And pricing and favored nation pricing is obviously one of the topics that's spinning out from the whole tariff situation. And that might open up the door for a greater conversation about how the system really works and where the value in the system plays. And I'll see that, there's always can be good and bad players, but I will see that there's an opportunity that it's not really the manufacturers themselves that are the ones that are causing a lot of these challenges. And then ultimately, the goal is to create balance and product security in terms of more manufacturing back in the U.S. API manufacturing is almost exclusively offshore in Asia Pacific and China and India. How do we create that a balance universally, not just in the U.S., but globally, so that we don't find ourselves in these positions of weakness in terms of either drug supply or being able to manage, control a price. And believe me, as manufacturers, we certainly look at ways to control price in order to maintain accessibility to our products, whether they're brand or generic. But I think now it's time to kind of jump into the theme of this. And this first inaugural episode is very exciting, is to really take, no pun intended, a generic approach to kind of a couple broad topics, because we really want to kind of set the stage of what's to come behind it. And as we move down through the monthly podcast, we'll get into topics that I think are very timely, and we'll get more specific into a smaller set of topics. But we thought the way to kick off is to kind of look at a couple areas. And the first question is, Nick, when we look at the state of the pharmaceutical industry in 2025, what are the things that come to mind to you?
I look at the industry pretty broadly, and I have to say that what I see is very robust. We're seeing really good growth. We're seeing good development. You look at the GLP-1 products, everybody points to them as, wow, these are a great breakthrough, and they are. We're making great breakthroughs in oncology as well. You see that in addition to this, you see it in rare diseases, immunology. So robust research and development, robust pipelines for organizations. We're using AI, machine learning to help products go through the development process that much quicker. So there are a lot of moving parts, but they're moving our industry in the right direction without a doubt. Now, that's the positive, of course, and I think by far the positives outweigh the negatives. But we see some significant negatives, and depending on how you capture this or how you intellectualize things like the tariffs or most favored nation, or the whole idea of the challenges with the supply chain post-COVID, these can be seen as negative. But we're where we have control, a la the supply chain. We're working through some of the kinks that are problematic. And you could just characterize, for right now, we can characterize the tariff and the most favored nation situation as an unknown. Yes, we're trying to work around it. We're trying to speculate. But in large measure, the industry is robust. The industry is solid, moving in the right direction, and really significant breakthroughs in medicine happening over the course of, the next, call it 6 months, year, 3 years, whatever time period you choose. I think we're going to see some monumental changes to some significant disease states.
Yeah, I think Nick raises some good points. I think that there is a lot of positive signs that things will continue to get better. We need to continue to find ways to allow branded companies to invest in new chemical entities, especially in rare disease or orphan disease, as you mentioned. I think that we'll continue to see changes in the FDA, and historically the FDA has been criticized for the number of product approvals. But we're starting to see some processes that might improve it. But interesting enough, we also still have this constant dynamic back and forth, because if I just read an article the other day that I forget the exact number, but like 60% of all the ANDAs, or the generic drug approvals, actually were not commercialized. So although we are making improvements in things like NDA or ANDA approvals, the question is, how is that enhancing the market in terms of patient access, costs, and so forth? So what we're seeing is that in certain areas, we might have products that are just not viable to a company to launch, even though they went through the process of getting it approved. I think there's another thing that, and this is what I think is going to be really fascinating as we continue to look at these kind of layers. And when we look at it through the delivery from a manufacturer to patient, is things like the cost of doing business in the U.S. has become very, very different and more challenging. Historically, when I first got in this industry many, many years ago, multiple decades, I won't tell how many, but we could look at the U.S. as kind of as a market, and now we have to kind of look at it as 50 different markets, because each state has many different dynamic requirements, and not all of them are the same. State licensing, our ability just to sell our product in the state now, I think it's 36 states now roughly now have state licensing requirements. So, we have to fully understand. I think that's what the power of this podcast is going to be about, is to fully take topics and see how it impacts all the way through the value chain in healthcare, because there's a lot of hidden things that put a lot of pressure on manufacturing. If all of a sudden we have all these additional costs, we now have states that require companies, that they want to sell in their states, the support SHARPS programs for needle disposal. I mean, again, it might not seem a lot, but when you start adding it up and adding it up and adding it up, and then Nick's mentioned earlier, some of the products that we sell don't have rich margins. They don't. So all of a sudden it becomes more challenging when we're looking at continued investment in development. But so we have a lot of things like that. I think one of the interesting things Nick and I were talking before we came on the podcast today was how the current system works is how manufacturers have to now work really hard to find workarounds. One of those workarounds is how companies are getting the patients and trying to come up with more direct pathways to the patient. And Nick, maybe you want to comment on that.
Yeah, it is pretty fascinating, and it happened in a very short period of time. When you talk about the digital approach to marketing that has happened, that somewhat evolved. But now we go from the digital approach to marketing and touching patients to really manufacturers having a direct interaction or interface with customers, which as an industry, we had thought about this for quite some time, but it never came to the fore like it has very recently with companies like Eli Lilly and Pfizer having programs where a patient can directly interface with the patient, with a manufacturer, get the product, and have a relationship, a product distributor relationship with the manufacturer. Those types of things have evolved very rapidly, and once the cat is out of the bag, or the horse leaves the barn, or whatever expression you want to use, these things are going to continue to evolve and continue to grow. So again, it's something that this podcast is oriented towards pharmacists. It's something that pharmacists and manufacturers alike are going to have to figure out. Well, we still have a symbiotic relationship in so many ways. How do we continue that relationship in the face of certain organizations going out and dealing directly with patients? In certain cases, with certain products, it might make good sense to go down that road. In others, the traditional relationship that has evolved over many decades might continue to make the most sense. So on the one hand, it's happening very rapidly. On the other, we really have to kind of observe it and see what is going to make the most sense for all players involved, be it manufacturers, be it patients, be it pharmacies or payers, middlemen in the middle.
Yeah, I think what's really interesting about this is that I think the theme of it is we have to find ways to work in a system that is not perfect, a system that makes it very challenging for all of us, especially on the manufacturer side and the pharmacy side. And as we, as manufacturers, have to try to find ways to at the end of the day, we have to be profitable companies. If we're not profitable, we can't continue to produce. If we're not profitable, we can't continue to develop and invest in new alternatives or new chemical entities or whatever might be our particular focus of our business. So we have to start finding these ways to go around, and direct to patient is one of them. But we also don't want collateral damage. And one of the pharmacist or the pharmacy channel is one that could be at most at risk of when we try to find these these new pathways to getting product to patient, but also staying profitable and staying in a position of ability to grow. And we can't have that happen. So I think what I'm saying is that ultimately, if we don't work together, if we don't work better, closer, and understand these issues, how they really affect us all the way through the pathway, we're not going to find the solutions. And I think that's what we're really after. But, I want to go back to the tariffs, because, one of the things that I think is going to be important about tariffs is not only how we manage working with customs and the operational elements of it, or the financial side on the cost standpoint. It's going to open up a greater kind of perspective, whether it's correct or not, in the public domain about the cost of drugs, which has always been there. So then you're talking about things like public trust. So Nick, do you think the tariffs situation is going to create more demand on us to continue to work even harder on trying to manage that existing, if not increasing, dynamic around public trust with pharmaceutical manufacturers?
That's a tough question, Steve.
Yeah. Well, that's why I'm the host and you're the guest.
I think a lot of this depends on how ultimately the tariffs manifest themselves, right? If, in fact, what happens is that manufacturers are left with no choice other than to raise the price of the products, that is going to be seen as, initially, not overall, but initially that will be seen as, and to use your vernacular, breaking the trust with the American public. However, admittedly, we as an industry have not done a very good job of this. But what we will need to be doing is to explain to the American public in chapter and verse, in a very simple way, exactly how the system works, if you will, and I'll use the air quotes for those of you who can't see, how the system works and where the value is being, in one case, added and in one case extracted. So the value add is the actual asset, helping the patient get better because they have a certain illness. Where the value is being extracted is getting the product from the manufacturer to that patient, be it the managed care organization and the PBMs with the value extraction there and the forced increase in the prices potentially, whatever that case may be. And I think we're all in the industry pretty well aware of where the pitfalls are in terms of value add and value extraction, but we're going to have to be able to communicate that in a much, much better way to the American public. Because I think if you were to ask any individual who's not in our industry, very broadly in our industry, be it insurance, be it PBM, be it a manufacturer, be it a pharmacy, if you ask any individual, they're not going to be able to quote 50% of where the value is lost in the whole equation with pharmaceutical products. But we just need to be that much better there because we are providing a substantial value to the American public, and not to mention helping individuals really get better, get over their illnesses, help with long-term illnesses, et cetera, et cetera. So that was a long-winded answer to your question, Stephen. I think the tariffs will point out the fact that, yes, the prices had to increase to pay for the tariffs ultimately, but the tariffs were, just like many other things in the ecosystem, the tariffs are not the only consideration that a pharmaceutical company makes in pricing the products. There are so many different areas where, to the example you were using before, money is extracted along the value chain.
I like what you said, Nick. I think for me, what's interesting about the tariffs is that it's like an onion. There's going to be a lot more layers. This is not just about bringing manufacturing back to the U.S. or favored nation or right pricing or whatever the terminology people want to use. But I do think what's important is that we have to be sensitive about this because there has been a generic narrative about pharmaceutical industries and how we price and we're price gouging. And I do think we can look at the tariffs as a bad thing, or we can look at the tariffs for what they are. In any situation in life, I think a business, personal, whatever, everything has a good and pro and a con, or good and bad. And I think the other good thing that could come out of this, to your point, is we won't have the full burden of articulating the story that how we price products, because I think the average American or the average patient gets certain sound bites and they've formulated a position that's actually been developed over probably the last 3 decades. And I think as a result of that, this is going to open up, I think, hopefully in a broader standpoint, how the system really operates. And they'll see some of the things that are good and some of the things that are not so good, or the extraction and in and out from a value standpoint. So I think at the end of the day, we need to embrace this in a positive way, and we'll have to find a way that ensures, again, that we can create that value all the way through. At the end of the day, if we take an independent pharmacist, in today's world, an independent pharmacist can actually lose money dispensing certain products, and they can make money dispensing certain products. But at the end of the day, if that independent pharmacist is not profitable, then by virtue of that scenario, they can't stay in business. And an independent pharmacist, like any pharmacist, is important. But if they're servicing a rural community where there is not another pharmacy, or they can't service their patients effectively, or they have to close their doors, and we know that if there's any channel that's having a lot of challenges and change right now, it is the pharmacy channel. So we have to make sure that we work together and understand clearly what's going on, so that maybe some improvements in the process will then allow that benefit to translate, again, all the way down to the patient.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So, if we think about what's unique about having Nick on the podcast first, is that we are 2 companies under the IBSA CH umbrella, one being brand and one being generic. So one of the always interesting questions that I get, or I'm sure you get many times, Nick, is, what perspectives are happening between generic versus brand from an innovation standpoint or anything else? So any thoughts in terms of the whole brand generic dynamic as you see it in the U.S.?
Yeah, because I have the benefit of being able to see both at a relatively close range. I'll kind of repeat a couple of the things that I had mentioned at the outset about the pharma industry on the brand side is very robust. Some really significant developments in oncology, in immunology, rare disease, et cetera, et cetera. And even anti-infectives, which many people in the industry thought that anti-infective work was really going by the wayside because of the problems associated with generating revenue in the anti-infective space, et cetera, et cetera. But we're even seeing developments there. So there is clear. I would say not exponential, but at least algorithmic growth in what's going on in research and development on the branded side of things, and it's across the industry in many different therapeutic areas. The generics are not without their interesting asset growth as well, and innovation. I mean, the biosimilars in and of themselves are, you could consider them innovation. They're really going to help out in terms of regulating the overall cost for the expensive medications throughout the country. That's going to be very beneficial. And then you see, some of the more difficult delivery systems, the injectables at all different levels, really getting into some areas that are, very interesting and probably not well thought of or not well thought out up until now. And then it's the generic industry that's really pulled them forward in terms of getting them to a point where we can ratchet down the costs a little bit and also provide the same product to the patient at a reduced cost. So I see innovation in a couple of different ways. Obviously different on the branded side with the focus on research and development.
Innovation, for me at least, the sense for me the last few years, the last 5 to 10 years, has kind of dipped a little bit because of the dynamics in the marketplace, whether it be regulatory, competitive set, relative investment margin, where products are being developed. We've seen a lot of our products being developed outside the traditional manufacturer into CDMOs, and I think we're going to see some evolution of that back. I think companies that have kind of divested that responsibility are seeing the need to pull that back in to control that innovation or prioritize that innovation. And you're absolutely right on the generic side. Biosimilars is clearly an innovation. I think the generic industry has changed dramatically. When I used to work with my prior company in the generic life, we used to define generics as small, medium, and large. We have really large generic companies, we have medium companies, we have small companies, and that kind of dictated where their portfolios went. But I think now when we really look at the generic industry from innovation is that we don't describe ourselves that anymore. Now it's either true commodity companies that are really playing in those high volume, low cost commodity products. And then everybody else is kind of evolving into more high complex companies, or maybe a hybrid. And that's really been seen in a lot of the larger generic companies where they're not really wanting to position themselves as a true generic organization, but as a hybrid brand generic. And I think, that's where that continued innovation is. So we've kind of shifted from this kind of traditional pathway of the most marbles won the game to having the right marbles. And I've used that line quite a bit in the past year at different conferences and so forth. And I think because of that, it's forcing us on the generic side to be more innovative, and not just innovative in manufacturing or the type of products, but also in terms of how we engage. I mean, maybe most people don't know is that 90% plus of all prescriptions are filled generically. And then there's that, because of that, because of the innovation starting to creep up on the generic side, because that's where, quite frankly and very honest, that's where a lot of the profitability comes, or the margin comes. That brings us a little bit closer to the brand side to some extent. So you're starting to see that integration of not only on the type of products, but also on how we engage the markets. So I think it's going to continue to create a very unique dynamic. But the most important thing we have to do is we've got to create a dynamic that ensures that innovation, to your point, continues to be fostered in the organization to create more opportunity for patients. And then we continue to have that balance between brand and generics in order to ensure access is also there, and that we can see that historically, and now we're going to start seeing biosimilars follow the path of more traditional generics. But funny enough, not too long ago, injectables were considered complex products, and now they're a commodity because we're now having to find newer innovation, whether it's dual chamber bags or we've gone from syringe and vial now that everything has to be pre-filled and things like that. So it's going to be very interesting how that continues to grow innovation. Let's just change gears a little bit. We talked a little bit about some of the the current trends and things that from an industry overview, but from a kind of a CEO perspective, if you think about strategy and growth and ultimately patient focus, how do you see IBSA USA having to navigate today's industry headwinds along those lines? How do you continue to prioritize growth and innovation and still meet patient needs and all those type of topics that we discuss every day?
Yeah. Again, it's a tall order to answer that question because there's so many moving parts to what's going on in our universe now with everything that we've talked about, right? We've got most favored nation kind of hanging out there in the balance. We've got the tariff issue going on. We are an international manufacturer, so we have that issue of the tariffs loom, and we manufacture in countries that will be hit hard if those tariffs come to the fore in the not too distant future. So the navigating the headwinds is right now it's like putting our heads down and making things happen in the here and now, because that's all we have. But we've got to be continually planning for the future in terms of, okay, we know this could happen. Do we contemplate any movement of manufacturing facilities? Well, that's not a tomorrow thing, as you know, Stephen. Mm-hmm. That's a 2-year, 5-year commitment, and what will happen, what will transpire in that amount of time. We give rational thought to these things, but the decision points are really going to, on some of them, are just going to have to wait until we actually see how the laws play out from the federal government on down. You mentioned something that was interesting before that we never talked about too much after that. But most of us look at the United States as 50 states, which obviously it is, but those individual states can really, the dynamics within those 50 states are vastly different for a company like ours, and I'm sure like most pharmaceutical companies. So in many cases, we have to engage with individual states, and that is a challenge as well. So again, this universal swirl, as I like to call it, there's so many things going around that you have to kind of pick and choose your battles, but you also have to put your head down and work with what you have right now.
Yeah, I think today the headwinds are still strong. I think, as you pointed out earlier, there's certainly opportunities, but the headwinds are still fierce. Because we do have constant downward pressure on pricing for very good reasons, maybe not so good reasons. We have costs are going up. So how do we continue to navigate through this in a way that we can achieve, the business metrics? I mean, the business metrics, whether it's in this pharmaceutical industry or the IT industry or the automotive industry, is ultimately in a capitalist society, we have to make profit, either to satisfy our shareholders or owners, or that's just simply how do we continue to be able to progress and go forward. And in the pharmaceutical industry, that's very evident. Technology industry, certainly, if you're not advancing, you're ultimately, life catches up to you. And I think that's where that fine balance comes in. So we need to find a way to do it. But, we have to prioritize growth. Growth, I think the definition of growth for me might be different. Our company's going to have to think about it differently in terms of growth, because it can't just be dollars. Growth has to be in terms of how you approach a portfolio development. Growth is in terms of how you reach different types of patients through that development that you do. So I think those are things that we have to find a way. But the traditional way we have done things has been a response to the way traditionally the industry's worked. And now you got things being like the tariffs that are going to force beyond the tariff itself is going to create change. And we have to be prepared to navigate through that. So we're not finding those end around opportunities that might not be beneficial to everybody in the system, and find some solutions that will be consistent through the whole system down to the patient. One of the questions is, what's the role of leadership right now in guiding this change? I mean, as a CEO, what do you think are some of the most important things that you have to be, or you are thinking about on a daily basis, in terms of decisions that are being made in order to translate that value all the way down?
I look at leadership as, obviously empowering individuals to do the best that they can. In this complex environment, we also have to provide some vision. We have to provide kind of the end game, the goal for individuals to work towards. And I think, once you have provided that vision, hey, this is what we're going to be doing over the course of the next 6 months and the next year, and this is how we work to it. Your job then is to keep the superfluous stuff aside, push aside the distractions for individuals. And believe me, the tariff issue, the most favored nation, is a major distraction because people will love to talk about it as much as they can. But really, it's just a swirl because they don't have any of the facts. So again, provide that vision, clear out the clutter, be it intellectual clutter or actual physical clutter, to let them do their jobs and get things done. I think if I, as a leader, can make those few things happen, then we can continue to move our business forward. We have smart people in the right places, as most companies do. People know how to do their job. They just need to kind of be released from this constant worry about the swirl in the background and say, hey, this is what I have in front of me. This is what I can do, and I'm going to go do it.
Yeah, I agree with you, Nick. I think that any good leader is going to have to be able to provide clear vision. And I think the outcome of a clear vision, one of the most important things is clarity. And when we're talking about all these headwinds and all these different things that are impacting it, and as a manufacturer, again, I don't think people always understand. We have to understand this all the way through, right? We have to navigate the regulatory side when we're trying to get products approved or maintaining products. We have to navigate the supply side. We got to navigate the delivery of products at the pharmacy and the patient and physicians. I don't know if people really maybe appreciate it. It's not just us manufacturing products and putting it on the shelf. There are many, many layers to this. And then when you add things like we talked about earlier, like managing operationally in a market that you, in essence, don't have one market but 50, that takes time, that takes effort, that takes resource, and I think that's the problem. So when we have all this noise going on, vision provides clarity, and I think on top of that, if for me as a leader, I think that communication is always something I talk about. I think it's fundamental along with culture. If you can't do that, and granted, communication should be part of culture, part of a good culture, but you've got to communicate well. And I think when we face all these issues and changes and uncertainty, we've got to find a better way as an industry to communicate clearly and consistently so that that the right message ultimately prevails and gets to the top. And I think when that happens, more people understand, more people will be aligned. And as a result of that, we'll find more solutions to it.
And if at the very least, they might understand the reason for the expense of some pharmaceutical products, if people understood, getting the full development process, what it costs to do preclinical work, to phase 1, to phase 2, to phase 3, to get a product through the FDA, and then to do phase 4 work when that's necessary or required by the FDA. And then, oh, by the way, we have to get the product from point A to point B. So there's all the supply chain along the way. And unlike other industries, many other industries, we can't just sell a product and wash our hands of it. We have pharmacovigilance issues to worry about. We have yearly reports to worry about with the FDA. So there are a lot of moving parts, and certainly a lot of those moving parts the general public doesn't necessarily, they might think about in the background, but they don't necessarily know fully what goes into making things happen to get a product from inception, concept, all the way to a patient. And to the point I think we're both making, we as an industry can tell that story much better than we're doing today.
Yeah, and and again, maybe that's the silver lining in the tariff situation. It is going to expose some of the things in a way that we can make some adjustments, make the system work better, and still make everybody that's involved in the system successful. But at the end of the day, our success starts and finishes with us being able to deliver value to the patients. there's a product that IBSA has that there is a generic dynamic in it, but there's 17 suppliers of the same product. We sometimes have to refresh what we're trying to accomplish. And if you go back to generics were put in place to create high quality, affordable products that were more accessible to the total population. And that's a really good thing. Now, maybe you say we didn't need generics if we changed other things like patent laws and other things that create different dynamics. But the fact is that was a premise. But sometimes you can actually overshoot the target a little bit because now we've created a dynamic where it's not fair pricing or right pricing. It's best pricing. It's creating more variability to the patients that get those products because of the diversity of manufacturing. So maybe in some of this will increase the ability to protect those essential products, create more opportunity within the market of the U.S., stabilize pricing a little bit, and maybe right size. Not that maybe it sounds competitive when I say right size out some of the natural competitors or number of players, but I think that is contributing to some of the challenges that we have. And if we can fix that, then that value can also translate all the way down to the pharmacy and ultimately the patient. So with the time we have left, I really was going to maybe talk one more topic, and that is, portfolio expansion. So we talked about innovation, we've talked about the pressures on the existing portfolios, but at the end of the day, pharmaceutical industry, whether it's brand or generic, really kind of live or die by their pipeline and their portfolio expansion or the creation of that. So how do you think, from your perspective, good companies are going to have to look at how they approach that, either internally, externally, to deliver on an ever-evolving and growing portfolio?
Yeah, that's interesting, and a lot has been written of it lately because clearly most companies from the largest research and development companies down to small biotechs, they have their own portfolio, stable, if you will, of products that are either in development or maybe in concept right now, but moving forward. But why you're reading a lot about it now is because with the advent of machine learning and AI, the processes are just increasing. The velocity at which the new potential new chemical entities are coming on board is just phenomenal. So now it's a good kind of problem to have, is that these, ourselves included, we're choosing among lots of different pipeline products. So now we're evaluating, okay, well, what's the most needed in the marketplace? Where do we see the most patients suffering, or patients that don't have there are no potential treatments for them right now, or a small population, a la the orphan or rare disease situation? How are we going to approach these markets? Because now we have potentially more candidates, more drug candidates, yes, but also what hasn't changed in this whole equation is the pathway, the regulatory pathway to get them approved. So that's always going to be, I won't call it a stumbling block, but it is an element of time that has to be considered. So to get a better answer to your question, how do I see it evolving? Well, I see us still picking from our stable of known products that are already have been kind of identified, but I see AI in a lot of ways helping us through that process, and also helping to develop new. They're not developing or not finding new chemical entities, but they're being fed the information that will ultimately churn out potential new chemical entities that will be beneficial to many, many different organizations.
I agree. I think, you take a therapeutic area like asthma, we haven't seen a lot of innovation in terms of new therapeutic options. We've seen, at the lack of that, we've seen actually what they've done is, for example, they've come with fixed combinations or triple combinations to try to create alternatives and opportunity. But I want us to continue to see an ability to get back to true innovation. And I think the difference this time is going to be even more aggressive trade-off. And we've got to find a way to change potentially patent laws to provide more reward for investment, because the pharmaceutical industry is extremely, extremely risky business. We put a lot of money up front, with no guarantee that we can even commercialize a product, because we do have a regulatory process for approval, rightfully so. And then we have to determine what the competitive set and the dynamic between brand and generic and all those different things, and payer, and what's covered, not covered. So it's a risky business, but at the end of the day, what we should be continuing to strive for is our ability, which is what I think the spirit of the industry has been, is to create better products that better serve. So one of the things I think that's going to be important in terms of portfolio expansion is we have to get away from just making certain products a little bit better. We got to see some more differentiation. I mean, there's benefits in doing that to a certain extent, but we're going to have to find ways to create products. So it goes back to my comment about, in the past, I think brand and generic, especially generic, it was all about how many products you had. And how big your portfolio is, and how that portfolio could influence the system down in a way to be successful. And I think it's no longer the most marbles. I think it is the right marbles. And I think when we do that, we're going to find that pharmaceutical companies can have a bigger portion of their portfolio that is in a fair or appropriate margin or profitability, and that comes, maybe there's some stability, and that stability can then work its way down, and maybe there's concessions within the middle part of the process, and then that ultimately translates down to the pharmacy. But at the end of the day, we have to get back to a situation, and everybody has to have a hand in it, that pharmacists, that if they dispense a product, they're not doing it at a loss, and that the patient can get that product at a fair price, and make sure that they can be compliant with their medication. So a lot of opportunity, but a lot of challenges to do that. But because it's such an highly interdependent industry, because we have so many people touching along the way or influencing along the way, we got to find a way to do better. And I think it starts, I think the manufacturing industry actually has a great opportunity to take a more aggressive lead in that and help try to drive that. Instead of us kind of sitting back and finding solutions or end arounds or things that we could do, we're going to have to find, I think, a more direct approach to change some of the things to make us more successful. So, Nick, I couldn't have asked for a better person to join me. It's a pleasure to have you on the initial podcast of Executive Dose. I hope the people that are listening will find this as an interesting platform. And as we move forward, we will have an opportunity to really dive into some very specific topics with a great list of additional guests. And with that, I'm going to actually turn it over to Todd, and he's going to give you just a little preview of some of those topics that we think are going to be important over the rest of the year, I guess.
Heck yeah, excited about this. The insights that we're going to get from the Executive Dose is exactly that. We're going to be dialing into what's happening in the market. We're going to be talking about the FDA. We're going to be talking about, becoming a leader in how biosimilars are going to change our markets. We're going to be talking about artificial intelligence and how the pharmaceutical industry is primed to be impacted by the artificial intelligence wave, and how to get the most out of that for drug development, and then, of course, ongoing education. I'm so excited, Stephen, that you're part of the Pharmacy Podcast Network now, and that we have listeners that are looking to jump in the car or take a walk and listen to something that is very dialed in to their specific sector of healthcare. And there's so much going on. We look to leaders on this podcast network to guide us and to give us direction and insight. So I want to say thank you to our first guest on the Executive Dose, Nicholas Hart, CEO of IBSA USA. Thank you so much for being here with Stephen and I. And Stephen, this is going to be a lot of fun. And I thank you so much for leading us on the Executive Dose.
Well, thank you. And I'll just close by saying to all you listening out there, the reason we're taking the time to do this is because we want to create a dialogue. We want to create a greater understanding and less assumptions in how we all operate, because by doing that, I think we'll appreciate that we all ultimately have more aligned goals than not. And I think when we do that, we're going to find an opportunity, a rich opportunity to explore and engage each other in a way that we haven't in the past. We've, the brand side, I've worked on both the brand and generic side of my career. And a lot of times we continue to do things the same way. We might find new modalities of marketing or sales, but we still have a tendency sometimes to do the same thing. And that is, we go out and we investigate, and then we make determinations and we execute. And sometimes that works really well, and sometimes it completely misses the mark. And I think that's what is really the passion of why Executive Dose came about, is that if we can open up that dialogue and everybody can see each other a little bit better, then that dialogue is going to be a lot richer, and we're going to find even better solutions that everybody will benefit. And as I always say, we're in this for the patient, and that's what we hope to continue to create, that kind of momentum and value for the people that we serve.
And we'll be back. The Executive Dose will be returning in June towards the end of the month, so be on the lookout. Go subscribe on all of your favorite podcast platforms, on Apple, on Spotify, anywhere you want to listen to podcasts. You'll find the Executive Dose podcast. Thank you for listening.